First Contact Protocol. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cool metal of the observation deck's window, watching as the stars slowly shifted around their research vessel. The Aurora Station had been humanity's most distant outpost for 7 years, a scientific research facility built in the shadow of a massive gas giant, where Elena studied the evolution of extremophile organisms. She never expected her quiet work cataloging alien microbes would lead to this moment. The message had arrived 3 days ago, transmitted on frequencies that human technology shouldn't have been able to detect. It came written in perfect English, though Elena was certain no human had taught these beings their language. The message was simple and terrifying. The species known as humanity has been selected for evaluation. Dr. Elena Vasquez will represent your kind at the Grand Assembly. A transport vessel will arrive in 72 hours. Compliance is not optional. Elena had spent those 3 days reviewing everything humanity knew about potential alien contact, which turned out to be embarrassingly little. Earth's governments had prepared protocols for first contact scenarios, but nobody had imagined it would begin with a summons to some kind of galactic court. The transport that arrived looked nothing like human spacecraft. It resembled a living thing more than a machine, with smooth organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. The being that emerged to collect her defied every assumption humans had made about alien life. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms arranged symmetrically around a torso that seemed to be made of crystalline material. Its head was an elongated oval with no visible eyes, but Elena could feel it watching her nonetheless. When it spoke, the words formed directly in her mind without passing through her ears. "I am Designate 7 of the Evaluation Collective," the being had announced. "You will accompany me to the assembly station. Your species' future depends on your performance there." Now Elena sat in what she assumed was the passenger compartment of the alien vessel, though the walls showed no seams or joints and appeared to be grown rather than constructed. The journey had taken what felt like several days, though the ship had no windows and time seemed to flow differently here. Elena had tried to engage Designate 7 in conversation, hoping to learn something about what awaited her, but the being had remained silent after their initial introduction. The ship shuddered slightly, and Elena felt the strange sensation of deceleration without any corresponding force against her body. Through the wall in front of her, which had suddenly become transparent, she saw their destination emerging from the darkness of space. The assembly station was unlike anything in human imagination. It appeared to be built into the surface of a massive asteroid, but the structure extended far beyond the rock's natural boundaries. Spires of impossible height reached out into space like the fingers of some enormous hand, and lights moved along their surfaces in patterns that hurt Elena's eyes to follow. As their ship approached a docking bay that opened like a flower to receive them, Elena caught glimpses of other vessels already moored to the station. Each one was radically different from the others, suggesting that the collective included multiple species with vastly different approaches to technology and design. Some ships looked like they were carved from single pieces of stone. Others appeared to be made of pure energy barely contained by invisible fields, and one resembled a massive seed pod that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Designate 7 rose from its position across the compartment and gestured for Elena to follow. As they disembarked, Elena found herself walking through corridors that seemed to adjust their lighting and atmosphere in response to her presence. The artificial gravity was exactly Earth normal, and the air carried the scent of growing things, though she could see no plants anywhere. They passed other beings in the corridors, each one representing a different species that Elena could never have imagined. One group consisted of what appeared to be living shadows that moved across the walls and ceiling as easily as they walked on the floor. Another being looked like a collection of geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves while maintaining the same basic outline. Most disturbing were the creatures that appeared almost human until Elena looked directly at them, at which point their features seemed to shift and blur in ways that made her eyes water. The corridor finally opened into a vast chamber that Elena initially mistook for an outdoor space. The ceiling was so high it was lost in darkness, and the walls curved away into the distance. In the center of the chamber stood 5 massive thrones, each one designed for a completely different type of being. 4 of the thrones were occupied. On the first throne sat a being that resembled a massive tree, its bark-like skin gnarled with age, and its branch-like arms reaching high above its head. Smaller creatures that might have been its offspring or symbionts moved among its branches like living fruit. The second throne held something that Alina's mind struggled to process. It appeared to be made of liquid metal that constantly flowed and reformed, while maintaining a roughly humanoid shape. Its surface reflected not the chamber around them, but images of stars and galaxies that seemed to move independently. The third being was the most alien of all. It existed as a collection of floating geometric shapes that orbited around a central void, occasionally combining in different configurations or splitting apart entirely. When it communicated, the shapes would arrange themselves into patterns that somehow conveyed meaning directly into Alina's consciousness. The fourth throne held a creature that looked like it had been carved from black stone, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift when Alina wasn't looking directly at them. "Welcome, representative of the species humanity," spoke the tree-like being, its voice carrying the sound of wind through leaves. "I am the Eternal Gardener, speaker for the Verdani Collective. We have observed your species for several of your generations and have determined that the time has come for evaluation." Alina stepped forward, fighting the urge to appear intimidated despite being completely outmatched. "Evaluation for what purpose? And why was I specifically chosen?" The liquid metal being flowed forward slightly on its throne. "You were selected because your neural patterns indicate the highest potential for understanding among your species," it said in a voice like the sound of waves on a distant shore. "I am the flowing thought, consciousness of the aquatic unity. Your species must prove its worth to join the galactic community or face the consequences of its inadequacy." "What consequences?" Alina asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The geometric shapes arranged themselves into a pattern that somehow conveyed amusement mixed with menace. "Species that fail evaluation are deemed incompatible with galactic civilization," the entity that Alina was beginning to think of as the Pattern Keeper explained. "They are prevented from achieving interstellar expansion through whatever means prove necessary." Alina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. "You destroy them." "We maintain the integrity of galactic civilization," corrected the stone creature in a voice like grinding rock. "I am the monument builder, keeper of the eternal archive. We have guided galactic development for millions of your years. Some species possess the wisdom to join the community. Others must be limited for the greater good." Alina looked around the vast chamber, noticing for the first time the empty fifth throne. "What happened to the last species you evaluated?" The silence stretched uncomfortably long before the Eternal Gardener responded. "The makers of song possessed great beauty in their creations, but lacked the strength necessary for survival in a challenging galaxy. They chose to limit themselves to their home system rather than undergo the trials. They remained there still, content with their small existence. But they survived," Alina said. "They exist," the monument builder corrected coldly. "Survival requires growth, adaptation, the will to claim one's place among the stars. The makers of song chose stagnation. Your species will have the same choice." Alina realized that she was looking at something far worse than simple xenophobia or territorial expansion. This was a systematic process of galactic management that had been going on for eons. How many species had been evaluated over the millennia? How many had been found wanting and destroyed or imprisoned on their home worlds? "What are these trials?" she asked. The flowing thought rippled with what might have been satisfaction. "3 tests that reveal the true nature of a species. The trial of intelligence will demonstrate whether your kind possesses the mental capacity necessary for galactic citizenship. The trial of compassion will show whether you can coexist with other forms of life. The trial of sacrifice will prove whether you have the strength to make difficult choices for the greater good." Elena felt the weight of her entire species' future settling on her shoulders. And if I fail any of these trials? The Pattern Keeper's shapes moved into a configuration that somehow conveyed finality. Then humanity will join the makers of song in their self-imposed isolation, or follow the path of the builders of stone and the children of fire into extinction. The implications were staggering. Elena was looking at the survivors of a systematic purge that had been eliminating species across the galaxy for millions of years. These 4 civilizations had passed their trials and earned the right to participate in this cosmic judgment of others. They had become the arbiters of which species deserved to exist beyond their home systems. When do the trials begin? Elena asked. They have already begun, the Eternal Gardener replied. Your first trial commenced the moment you stepped aboard the transport vessel. Every choice you make, every question you ask, every reaction you display is being evaluated. The formal trials will begin tomorrow, but the true test began when your species first reached for the stars. Elena was escorted to quarters that had been prepared for her needs, complete with Earth-normal atmosphere and gravity. The room was comfortable but clearly a cage, with walls that showed her images of Earth when she touched them and furniture that adjusted itself to her body without her request. As she sat on the edge of the bed that had formed itself from the floor, Elena realized that she was not just representing humanity in some abstract sense. The choices she made in the coming days would determine whether her species joined the galactic community or faced destruction. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing, but Elena had not become a xenobiologist because she backed down from challenges. She had spent her career studying life in the most extreme environments imaginable, learning how organisms adapted to survive in conditions that should have been impossible. Now she would have to apply those same principles to the survival of her entire species. She touched the wall again and watched images of Earth flow past. Cities full of humans going about their daily lives, unaware that their existence hung in the balance. Children playing in parks, scientists working in laboratories, artists creating beauty for its own sake. All of it threatened by a galactic system that had appointed itself the judge of which species deserved to survive. Elena made a decision that would change everything. She would not just try to pass these trials and gain admission to this cosmic club. She would find a way to challenge the entire system that made such trials necessary. Humanity had not reached for the stars just to bow down to a galactic bureaucracy that measured worth through trials and competitions. Tomorrow the formal trials would begin, but Elena's real test had already started. She needed to find a way to save not just humanity, but every species that would come after them. The galaxy needed to be freed from this cycle of judgment and elimination. As she prepared for sleep in her alien prison, Elena began planning for something the collective had probably never encountered before. A species that refused to accept the rules of the game. The trials of worth. Elena awoke to find that her room had transformed overnight. What had been simple walls now displayed complex three-dimensional images that moved and shifted as she watched. When she approached one of these displays, information began flowing directly into her mind. Not in words, but in pure concepts that bypassed language entirely. She was seeing the history of the collective, or at least the version they wanted her to understand. Images showed the 5 founding species discovering each other across the galaxy, initially through conflict and misunderstanding, gradually learning to cooperate and eventually establishing the system of trials that now governed galactic expansion. According to this history, the trials were a necessity that had prevented countless wars and ensured that only mature, responsible species joined the galactic community. But Elena noticed what was missing from this sanitized history. There were no images of the species that had failed the trials, no mention of what prevention from interstellar expansion actually entailed, no explanation of how exactly the collective had acquired the authority to make these decisions for the entire galaxy. Designate 7 appeared in her doorway without warning, its crystalline form somehow managing to convey impatience despite having no facial features. The first trial begins, it announced. You will be tested on your species' capacity for complex problem-solving and abstract reasoning. Elena followed the being through corridors that seemed different from the day before, as if the station itself was reconfiguring based on some unknown schedule. They arrived at a chamber that reminded Elena of a laboratory, if laboratories were designed by beings who thought in 4 dimensions. Equipment that she couldn't identify hummed with energy along the walls, and in the center of the room stood a device that looked like a crystalline tree with branches that extended into mathematical impossibilities. The eternal gardener was waiting for her, its bark-like skin now showing patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with the strange device. "The trial of intelligence is simple in concept," it explained. "You must solve a problem that has confounded our greatest minds for centuries. This device generates patterns of energy that follow rules we do not understand. If your species possesses intelligence worthy of galactic citizenship, you will discern these rules and demonstrate your understanding." Elena approached the device cautiously. As she drew near, the branches began to glow more brightly, and she felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the air itself was becoming charged with potential. The patterns of light flowing through the crystalline branches were beautiful but seemingly random, like watching electricity dance through a sculpture made of living glass. She spent hours studying the device, making notes, trying to identify any recurring patterns or logical progressions. The eternal gardener watched silently, occasionally making adjustments to the device that would cause the patterns to shift in new directions. Elena began to feel frustrated and manipulated. The test seemed designed to be unsolvable, a way to prove that humanity wasn't intelligent enough to join whatever exclusive club the collective represented. Then she had a different thought. What if the device wasn't actually generating patterns according to unknown rules? What if it was responding to something else entirely? Elena began to pay attention not to the patterns themselves, but to her own reactions to them. When she felt curious, the patterns became more complex. When she felt frustrated, they simplified. When she felt wonder at their beauty, they became more colorful and elaborate. The device wasn't testing her ability to solve an abstract puzzle. It was testing her emotional and psychological responses, measuring whether humans possessed the capacity for wonder, curiosity, and aesthetic appreciation that the collective valued. Elena realized that the problem that had confounded their greatest minds was not a mathematical equation to be solved, but a mirror that reflected the observer's inner nature. She stepped back from the device and addressed the eternal gardener directly. "This isn't really a test of intelligence, is it? You're measuring something else entirely." The patterns of light in the gardener's bark shifted to what Elena was beginning to recognize as approval. "Explain your reasoning." The device responds to the observer's emotional and psychological state, not to logical analysis. You're testing whether humans possess the capacity for wonder and aesthetic appreciation, whether we can recognize beauty for its own sake, rather than just viewing everything as a problem to be solved. And do you believe your species possesses these qualities? Elena thought about human art, music, literature, the way people would travel vast distances just to see a beautiful sunset or listen to the sound of ocean waves. "Yes, but I think you already know that. You've been observing us for generations. You know that humans create art even when we're struggling to survive, that we preserve beauty even when it serves no practical purpose. This test isn't really about measuring our intelligence. It's about measuring our character." The eternal gardener's approval was unmistakable now. "You have passed the first trial, though perhaps not in the way you expected. Proceed to the second trial." Elena was escorted to a different chamber, this one containing what appeared to be a series of transparent containers, each one holding a different form of life. Some she recognized as variations on familiar patterns, but others were completely alien. In one container, something that looked like living music moved in patterns that created audible harmonies. In another, geometric shapes divided and recombined while apparently engaged in complex social interactions. The flowing thought was waiting for her here, its liquid metal form reflecting not the chamber around them, but images of countless different worlds and the creatures that inhabited them. "The trial of compassion," it announced. You must choose which of these life forms deserves to survive. Resources are limited, and only one container can be maintained. Your choice will demonstrate whether humanity possesses the wisdom to make difficult decisions about the value of life. Elena studied the containers more carefully. Each one held a complete ecosystem in miniature, with the central life form supported by dozens of smaller organisms. Choosing one would mean allowing the others to die. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. But Elena began to suspect that this trial, like the first one, was not what it appeared to be. "What happens to the containers I don't choose?" she asked. "Their life support will be discontinued. The ecosystems will fail, and the organisms will die." Elena looked at the beautiful, impossible life forms trapped in their containers and felt a surge of anger. "Then I refuse to choose." The flowing thought's surface rippled with what might have been surprise. The trial requires a choice. Failure to choose is failure of the trial. "No," Elena said firmly. "The trial is based on a false premise. You're asking me to play God with the lives of beings who never consented to be part of your test. The compassionate choice is to reject the entire scenario. These life forms were created specifically for this trial. They exist only to be chosen or rejected." Elena felt her anger growing. "Created to die for your amusement. That makes it worse, not better. You brought these beings into existence just to use them as props in a philosophical exercise. The compassionate response is to refuse to participate in your manufactured crisis." She began examining the containers more closely, looking for their control systems. "How do I release them? How do I free them from this test? That is not within the parameters of the trial." "Then change the parameters." Elena found what appeared to be a maintenance panel and began trying to understand its controls. "If you really want to test human compassion, test our willingness to reject cruel choices and find alternatives." The flowing thought was silent for a long moment, its surface showing rapid changes that Elena interpreted as internal debate or communication with the other collective members. Finally, it spoke. "Your species continues to surprise us. Very well. The containers will be maintained regardless of your choice. You have passed the second trial by refusing to accept its premise." Elena felt a mixture of relief and growing suspicion. The trials were not what they seemed to be, but she was beginning to understand what they actually measured. They weren't testing humanity's worthiness to join a galactic civilization. They were testing humanity's willingness to submit to the collective's authority and accept their version of how the galaxy should be governed. The third chamber was different from the others. It was smaller, more intimate, and contained only a simple chair facing a large window that looked out at the stars. The monument builder was waiting for her, its stone-like form carved with patterns that seemed to tell stories in some visual language Elena couldn't read. "The final trial," it announced in its grinding voice. "The trial of sacrifice. You must choose between the survival of your species and the survival of another." The window lit up to show Elena 2 star systems. In one, she could see Earth and its surrounding colonies, billions of humans going about their lives. In the other, she saw a world populated by beings she had never encountered before, creatures that appeared to be made of living crystal who had built cities that sang with harmonious frequencies. The makers of song, Elena realized. Indeed, they failed their trials and were confined to their home system. However, their continued existence threatens the stability of local space. Their crystalline technology generates resonances that interfere with our ability to maintain order in this region of the galaxy. One species must be eliminated to preserve cosmic stability. Choose which one survives. Elena stared at the 2 star systems, understanding that she was looking at the real face of the collective system. This wasn't about worthiness or galactic citizenship. This was about control, about eliminating any species that didn't fit into their vision of how the galaxy should be organized. "How many times have you presented this choice to other species?" she asked. "Each species faces unique circumstances, but the principle is constant. Difficult choices must be made for the greater good." Elena thought about the empty 5th throne in the main chamber and the species that had supposedly chosen isolation. How many of those choices had been made at the point of a weapon? How many species had been forced to sacrifice others to save themselves? "I refuse," she said simply. The monument builder's patterns shifted to configurations that Elena was learning to recognize as surprise and anger. Refusal means the destruction of both species. Is your pride worth the lives of billions? "My answer isn't pride," Elena replied. "It's a rejection of your entire system. You created this problem by confining the makers of song to their home system in the first place. You're asking me to validate your past crimes by committing new ones." She turned away from the window and faced the monument builder directly. "But I understand now what these trials are really about. You're not testing our worthiness. You're testing our willingness to become like you, to accept that some species must be sacrificed for the supposed greater good. You want humanity to join your system of cosmic management and help you eliminate anyone who doesn't conform." The chamber fell silent except for the subtle vibrations that Elena was beginning to recognize as the monument builder's equivalent of breathing. Finally, it spoke. "Explain your reasoning. The trials are designed to measure specific qualities that align with your civilization's values. Intelligence, but only the kind that leads to compliance with your authority. Compassion, but only the kind that accepts artificial scarcity and impossible choices. Sacrifice, but only of others, never of the system itself." Elena walked to the window and looked out at the two threatened star systems. "You've been doing this for millions of years, haven't you? Eliminating any species that might challenge your authority or develop alternative approaches to galactic civilization. You call it maintaining order, but it's really about maintaining your power." The monument builder remained silent, but Elena could feel the attention of all 5 collective members focused on her. She had passed some invisible threshold, moved beyond the parameters of their tests into territory they hadn't anticipated. "Here's what I think really happened," Elena continued. "You 5 species weren't the first to reach galactic civilization. You were just the ones who survived whatever catastrophe or conflict destroyed the previous order. You created this system of trials to ensure that no other species could challenge your authority or offer alternatives to your way of doing things." The silence stretched longer, and Elena realized she had touched on something the collective didn't want to acknowledge, even to themselves. When the monument builder finally spoke, its voice carried new undertones that Elena's translator couldn't identify. "Your species is more perceptive than anticipated. What do you propose?" Elena turned back to face the chamber. "I propose we end this cycle. Instead of trials to determine worthiness, create partnerships to develop potential. Instead of eliminating species that don't conform, learn from their differences. Instead of maintaining order through control, try building stability through cooperation. And if other species refuse cooperation, if they choose conflict over collaboration, then you deal with specific problems as they arise, not preemptively eliminate entire civilizations because they might someday cause trouble. You judge actions, not potential." Elena walked toward the door of the chamber. "I'm going to leave now. I'm going to return to my ship and go back to Earth. And I'm going to tell my species what I learned here. Not just about you, but about the choice we face. Join your system of cosmic control or find another way to reach for the stars. If you leave, both humanity and the makers of song will be destroyed." Elena paused at the doorway. "Then you'll prove my point about what your system really represents, but I don't think you'll do it. Because I think you're tired of being the executioners of galactic potential, and you're hoping someone will show you a different way." As she walked back through the corridors of the assembly station, Elena realized that the real trial had been whether humanity would submit to the collective's authority or choose to forge its own path among the stars. She had made that choice, and now the galaxy would have to live with the consequences. Behind her, in chambers that had witnessed the judgment of countless species over millions of years, the collective began to reconsider everything they thought they knew about order, authority, and the price of survival. Breaking the cycle. Elena's return journey to Earth took place in a very different vessel than the one that had brought her to the assembly station. Instead of the living ship of Designate 7, She found herself aboard a craft that appeared to be grown from the same crystalline material as the makers of Song's cities. The ship sang as it traveled through space, its hull resonating with frequencies that created music out of the cosmic background radiation. The pilot was one of the makers of Song themselves, a being whose body seemed to be composed of living crystal that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. When it communicated, the words came as musical tones that Alina's translator converted into meaning, but the emotional content of the music came through directly, filling her with sensations of curiosity, hope, and barely contained excitement. Your refusal has created ripples throughout the collective, the being explained as they traveled through hyperspace. I am harmony of distant stars, and I speak for my people. We have been isolated for 300 of your years, but we have not been idle. We have been preparing. Alina looked out at the swirling patterns of hyperspace and wondered what kind of preparation the makers of Song could have been doing while confined to a single star system. Preparing for what? For the day when someone would refuse the collective's trials and open the possibility of change. We have been developing technologies that function outside their control systems, creating networks of communication that they cannot monitor, building alliances with other species they believe they have eliminated or contained. The implications were staggering. How many other species are out there? Harmony's crystalline form brightened with what Alina was learning to recognize as excitement. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. The collective has been systematically eliminating or isolating species for millions of years, but they have not been as thorough as they believe. Some species have hidden in regions of space that the collective considers uninhabitable. Others have learned to mask their technological signatures. A few have even infiltrated the collective's own territory, posing as primitive civilizations, while secretly developing advanced capabilities. Alina felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. Are you talking about a rebellion? We prefer to think of it as an awakening. The collective has maintained control by making each species believe they are alone, that cooperation is impossible, that the only choices are submission or destruction. But isolation breeds creativity, and necessity drives innovation. The hidden species have developed technologies and philosophies that the collective cannot comprehend. As they approached Earth's solar system, Harmony shared more information about the hidden galactic civilization that had been developing parallel to the collective's controlled expansion. Alina learned about the wandering libraries, nomadic fleets that preserved the knowledge and culture of extinct species while traveling through the spaces between stars. She heard about the symbiotic worlds, where multiple species had learned to share ecosystems without the artificial scarcity that the collective used to justify their trials. Most importantly, she learned about the network of dreams, a form of communication that operated outside normal spacetime and allowed isolated species to share thoughts and experiences across vast distances. How long have you known about humanity? Alina asked as Earth grew larger in their view screen. Since your species first achieved spaceflight, we have been watching and waiting, hoping that humans would choose a different path than the one the collective offers. Your refusal to participate in their trials has confirmed our hopes. Alina thought about the weight of responsibility that this revelation placed on humanity. What happens now? Now we find out whether your species as a whole will choose the path of cooperation over the path of control. The collective will offer humanity membership in their system, with all the benefits and restrictions that entails. But we can offer something different: partnership in a galactic community based on voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. As their ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Alina saw that something had changed while she was gone. The orbital space around Earth was filled with ships, not just human vessels but craft from dozens of different species. Some she recognized from the assembly station, but others were completely new to her experience. Harmony noticed her surprise. The hidden species have been revealing themselves to human observers throughout your solar system. Your refusal at the assembly station was broadcast through the network of dreams to every free civilization in the galaxy. They want to meet the species that finally said no. Alina's ship landed at the same spaceport where her journey had begun, But the facility had been transformed. What had been a small research station was now a bustling hub of interspecies activity. Humans worked alongside beings she had never imagined, sharing technologies and exchanging knowledge in an atmosphere of excitement and discovery. Dr. Sarah Chen, Alina's colleague and friend, was waiting for her at the landing platform. Behind her stood representatives from Earth's government, but Alina barely noticed them. She was too busy staring at the transformation that had occurred in her absence. "Alina, thank God you're back," Sarah said, embracing her friend. "Everything's been happening so fast. First, the collective ships arrived offering formal membership in their galactic community. Then these other species started appearing from everywhere. They're saying you started some kind of revolution." Alina looked around at the bustling activity surrounding them. Humans were learning to communicate with gas-based intelligences that existed as patterns of ionized particles. Engineers were studying propulsion systems that operated on principles Earth's scientists had never considered. Children were playing games with young aliens whose forms defied every assumption about the requirements for intelligent life. "Not a revolution," Alina said quietly. "An awakening." Over the following days, Alina found herself at the center of negotiations between three different visions of humanity's future. The collective, represented by Designate 7 and backed by their massive technological superiority, offered immediate access to advanced technologies, protection from hostile species, and membership in a stable galactic civilization. The price was submission to their authority and participation in their system of controlled expansion. The hidden species, speaking through Harmony and dozens of other representatives, offered partnership in a looser confederation based on voluntary cooperation and shared resources. They had less advanced technology in some areas, but they offered something the collective could not: freedom to develop according to humanity's own values and priorities. The third option was isolation, remaining in Earth's solar system and developing independently until humanity was strong enough to make its own choices about galactic involvement. Alina participated in the debates and discussions, but she found herself thinking more about the collective members she had left behind at the assembly station. The trials had been designed to measure more than just humanity's characteristics. They had been a reflection of the collective's own fears and insecurities, a way of ensuring that no other species would challenge the choices they had made millions of years ago. The breakthrough came when an unexpected message arrived at Earth. It was broadcast on frequencies that required both collective and hidden species technology to decode, and it came from the assembly station itself. When Alina activated the message, she found herself looking at all 5 members of the collective, but something had changed in their demeanor. The Eternal Gardener spoke first, its bark patterns showing configurations Alina had never seen before. "Representative Alina Vasquez, your departure from the assembly station has initiated discussions among the collective that have not occurred for millions of years. We find ourselves reconsidering assumptions that have guided our actions since the founding of our civilization." The flowing thought rippled with new patterns as it continued the message. "The hidden species you have revealed to us were not as hidden as they believed. We have been aware of their existence but chose to ignore them as long as they did not threaten our authority. Your refusal has forced us to acknowledge that our system of trials and elimination has created the very conflicts we sought to prevent." Alina felt her heart racing as she listened to the most powerful beings in the galaxy questioning their own fundamental assumptions. The Pattern Keeper's geometric forms moved into configurations that Alina was beginning to understand represented deep uncertainty. "We offer a proposal. The trials will be suspended indefinitely. The restrictions on isolated species will be lifted. We request that all species, both those in our current system and those in the hidden confederation, participate in developing new protocols for galactic civilization." The monument builder's final words carried the weight of eons. "We have been the guardians of galactic order for so long that we forgot the difference between order and control. Perhaps it is time to discover what the galaxy might become if species are free to develop according to their own nature." Alina looked around at the humans and aliens who had gathered to hear the message. She saw hope in faces both human and alien, but she also saw uncertainty. The collective's offer represented a fundamental shift in galactic politics, but it also raised countless questions about how such a transition could actually work. "What do you think?" Sarah asked quietly. "Can we trust them?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I think they're as scared as we are. They've built their entire civilization around the idea that they need to control galactic development to prevent chaos. Admitting that their system might be wrong is probably the most frightening thing they've ever done." Harmony of distant stars approached their group, its crystalline form resonating with harmonics that Elena was learning to interpret as cautious optimism. The hidden species have been discussing the collective's proposal through the network of dreams. There is consensus that this opportunity should not be dismissed, but also agreement that safeguards must be established. "What kind of safeguards?" Elena asked. "The transition must be gradual and voluntary. Species that prefer the current collective system should be free to maintain it. Those that choose alternative approaches should be equally free to develop them. Most importantly, no single species or group of species should have the authority to make decisions for others." Over the following weeks, Elena found herself traveling throughout the solar system as Earth became the unofficial headquarters for the most ambitious diplomatic effort in galactic history. Representatives from hundreds of species arrived to participate in discussions about how to restructure galactic civilization from the ground up. The conversations were unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered that their conflicts had been artificially maintained by the collective's system of managed scarcity. Civilizations that had developed in isolation shared technologies and philosophies that revolutionized the understanding of what was possible. Elena was particularly fascinated by her interactions with the collective members themselves. Away from the formal setting of the assembly station, they revealed depths of character and complexity that the trials had never shown. The Eternal Gardener spoke about the loneliness of maintaining order across countless worlds, the weight of decisions that affected entire species, and the gradual realization that their system had become a prison for everyone involved, including themselves. The flowing thought shared memories of its species' own trials, eons ago, and the fear that had driven them to accept the collective's authority rather than risk destruction. It spoke about watching other species face the same choice and wondering if there might have been alternatives that were never explored. The Pattern Keeper revealed that its geometric form was not its natural state, but an adaptation developed to interface with the collective's technology. In its original form, it had been something closer to what humans might recognize as a plant. But centuries of modification had transformed it into something that could think in the mathematical abstractions the collective required. Most revealing was the Monument Builder, whose stone-like appearance concealed a species that had once been masters of biological art, creating living sculptures and architectural forms that grew and evolved over time. The rigid, unchanging appearance it now maintained was a symbol of the stability the collective claimed to represent, but Elena could see the sadness in its patterns when it spoke about the organic creations its people had abandoned. "We became what we believed the galaxy needed," it explained during one of their conversations, "but we forgot to ask whether the galaxy actually wanted what we were offering." The negotiations were not without their challenges. Some species within the collective system resisted any change, arguing that millions of years of stability should not be abandoned for untested alternatives. Others among the hidden species wanted complete dissolution of the collective's authority, immediate freedom for all restricted species, and reparations for the civilizations that had been destroyed over the millennia. Elena found herself in the role of mediator, not because of any formal authority, but because her refusal at the assembly station had created the opening that made these discussions possible. She worked to find compromises that addressed legitimate concerns while maintaining momentum toward fundamental change. The breakthrough came when a representative from one of the supposedly extinct species arrived at Earth. The being called itself an echo of the Builders of Stone, one of the civilizations the Monument Builder had mentioned as having been eliminated centuries ago. It had survived by hiding in the quantum foam between dimensions, maintaining a minimal existence while preserving the knowledge and culture of its people. "We do not seek revenge," the echo explained, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested vast loneliness and patient endurance. We seek the opportunity to exist again, to contribute to a galaxy that has room for different approaches to life and growth. The Echo's presence proved that even the collective's most final judgments could be reversed, that species thought lost forever might still be recovered. This revelation energized the negotiations and provided concrete proof that alternatives to the collective system were not just theoretical possibilities. The final agreement, when it came, was simpler than Alina had expected but more profound than anything she had imagined. The Galactic Covenant, as it came to be known, established three basic principles that would govern interspecies relations. First, no species would have authority over the development of another species. Each civilization would be free to grow according to its own values and priorities, with intervention permitted only in cases of direct aggression against others. Second, resources and knowledge would be shared voluntarily through a network of bilateral and multilateral agreements, with no species forced to participate in arrangements that violated their fundamental values. Third, disputes would be resolved through mediation and negotiation, with force used only as a last resort and only to prevent immediate harm to others. The covenant was far from perfect, and Alina knew that implementing it would require generations of patient work. But it represented something that had not existed in the galaxy for millions of years: the possibility that different species could coexist without one group imposing its will on all others. As Alina stood on the observation deck of Earth's primary space station, watching ships from dozens of species preparing to carry the Covenant to their home worlds, she reflected on how far humanity had come from that moment when she had refused to participate in the collective's trials. Harmony of distant stars approached her, its crystalline form glowing with patterns that Alina had learned indicated deep satisfaction. "Your species has given the galaxy a great gift," it said. "Not just the courage to say no, but the wisdom to show us what yes might look like." Alina smiled, watching as a ship designed by the Echo of the Builders of Stone departed for a dimensional pocket where other thought-extinct species were waiting to learn that they could emerge from hiding. "I think we all gave each other something important. We showed that the galaxy is big enough for everyone, if we're willing to make room." In the months that followed, Alina returned to her research on extremophile organisms, but her work had taken on new dimensions. She was now studying life forms from dozens of worlds, learning how different species had adapted to impossible environments, and discovering new principles of biology that challenged every assumption humans had made about the requirements for life. The collective members had also returned to their home worlds, but they maintained regular communication with Earth and the other Covenant species. They were slowly dismantling the systems of control they had maintained for eons, not through sudden revolution, but through patient reform that allowed their own people to rediscover the creativity and diversity they had suppressed. The Eternal Gardener had begun working with agricultural species to develop new approaches to ecosystem management that emphasized cooperation rather than control. The Flowing Thought was exploring new forms of consciousness that emerged from voluntary collaboration between different types of minds. The Pattern Keeper was rediscovering the organic mathematics that its species had once practiced, finding beauty in equations that grew and evolved rather than remaining fixed. The Monument Builder was creating new forms of architecture that changed and adapted over time, buildings that were alive and responsive to their inhabitants' needs. Alina received regular reports about species that were emerging from hiding, civilizations that were being contacted for the first time, and new forms of cooperation that no one had imagined possible under the old system. The galaxy was becoming a more diverse, more creative, and ultimately more alive place than it had been in millions of years. Sometimes Alina wondered if she had made the right choice when she walked away from the assembly station trials. The transition to the new system was not without problems, and there were still species that chose conflict over cooperation. But when she looked at the children playing with young aliens in Earth's parks, when she saw human and alien scientists working together to solve problems that neither could address alone, when she received messages from the Echo of the Builders of Stone about other thought-extinct species choosing to emerge from hiding, she knew that the choice had been correct. Humanity had reached for the stars not to dominate or control, but to discover what was possible when different forms of life worked together. In refusing to accept the collective's trials, Alina had not just saved her species from a false choice. She had helped the entire galaxy remember that cooperation was stronger than control, that diversity was more valuable than uniformity, and that the universe was vast enough to contain infinite possibilities for growth and discovery. The stars were no longer a battlefield where species fought for the right to exist. They had become a garden where different forms of life could grow according to their own nature, contributing to a galactic community that was stronger because of its diversity rather than despite it. Alina's simple act of walking away from a rigged test had broken a cycle of control that had lasted for millions of years. Now the galaxy was free to discover what it might become when every species was allowed to reach its full potential. The future was uncertain, but it was also unlimited, and for the first time in eons, that uncertainty felt like hope rather than fear. As she returned to her laboratory to study samples from a newly discovered world where silicon-based and carbon-based life had learned to exist in symbiosis, Alina smiled at the thought that the greatest discoveries were still ahead of them. The galaxy was vast, life was endlessly creative, and humanity had finally found its place among the stars not as conquerors or subjects, but as partners in the endless adventure of existence.